Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. That's better. We're live on YouTube right now, and welcome to the 41st Annual General Meeting of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly. And thank you for everyone in attendance today. I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement, if I may. Thank you. This meeting is hosted from what is now called Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and home today to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We recognize that participants joining us from many territories across what is now called Ontario. We invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the land where you are and to offer gratitude to the nations who time immemorial. Land acknowledgements are not a formality. They are an act of reflection and commitment. We each share responsibility to learn from and act on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, and to challenge the ongoing systems of colonialism that continue to create inequalities. As we begin, we also recognize that Indigenous peoples continue to experience disproportionate poverty and marginalization as a direct result of sustained colonial practices, laws, and violence, realities that we all have a role in changing. My name is Graham Webb. I'm the Executive Director of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly. I would like to turn the meeting over to our board co-chair, Domenica Ozarko.
Thank you, Graham. My name is Domenica Ozarko, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Holly Street Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, Inc., which we call ACE. On behalf of the Board of Directors, thank you all for attending the 2024-25 Annual General Meetings of the members of ACE. I have been advised that we have a quorum, and do we have a number? We have 20 members present in person or by proxy, so that we have a quorum and we may conduct the 2025 Annual General Meeting. I would like to first begin with the report of the Chair of the Board of the Directors. Change happens one step at a time. And in the area of elder law, ACE has long been the impetus assisting us to take those steps towards a safer community for vulnerable seniors, changing our society for the better. From intake through court appearances, from interviews through public education, the amazing lawyers and legal support team that is ACE gives tirelessly of their expertise. They are dedicated, thoughtful, and persistent in their support of low-income seniors. Next year will mark 10 years since Graham Webb brought his vision to the position of Executive Director. His tenure has brought a true sense of team to the clinic. Graham is an exceptional leader whose empathy, compassion, and thoughtfulness has created a brilliant working team which supports the senior at intake with the same passion as it tackles long existing systemic issues. The members of the Board of Directors are volunteers. Volunteers give their time, energy, and skills in the hopes of making a positive impact on their community. And as directors of ACE, we have that. Graham has created a brilliant working team atmosphere, which allows us to assist in the leadership and support of the inspiring work of the ACE staff. The entire staff and directors are one team under the exceptional leadership of Graham, whose energy appears to be tireless. I have been privileged to serve on the board, and I thank you all. So now, in order to move efficiently through tonight's business, I've asked certain members of the ACE board to move and second certain motions. This is not intended to preempt nor discourage any discussion or participation from our members, but it's only to organize and coordinate how we move through the agenda. So if you have any questions at any time, please raise your hand. Our first item of business is to approve the minutes of November 26, 2024 Annual General Meeting. The ACE Board Secretary, Carol Cohen, will present this motion.
Let's try that again. So good evening, welcome. So this item of business is a motion to approve the minutes of the last AGM, which occurred in 2024. I move as follows. Be it hereby resolved to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the annual general meeting of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly held Tuesday, November 26th, 2024, and to accept them as circulated. Will someone please second the motion? So with the consent of the Vice Chair, I now open the meeting for discussion of the motion, if any. With the consent of the Vice Chair, I'll now ask for a vote by voicing yay or nay by members of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly who are entitled to vote today. All in favor, please say yay. 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 All against, please say nay. I declare the motion carried.
Our second and third items of business are to report on our financial position, present our audited financial statements for approval, and approve our auditors for the current year. I ask that our treasurer, Matthew Furrow, come forward to present the audited financial statements.
All right, thank you. So the audited financial statements were circulated in the annual report that people should have been able to pick up at the door. Yes, here up on the screen is the statement of the financial position of the clinic as of the fiscal year end of March 31st, 2025, which has been audited, independently audited by Hilborn LLP, the clinic's auditors. So as at March 31st, 2025, the clinic had $44,000 in its general fund, $444,000 in cash and investments kept in its other sources fund, which is essentially reserve funds for the clinic, which increased compared to the prior year. And if you, maybe we can turn to the statement of operations, which is page 5 of that. So we have the clinic over the past fiscal year had a modest excess of revenues over expenses. And the conclusion of the auditors in their report is that the clinic is not exposed to significant sources of risk of market or credit or liquidity risk. Subject to any questions, I think that's an overview of the clinic finances. And so with that background, then I will move as follows. So first, it would be the approval of the auditor's report. Again, the report that's in the materials there. So I would like to move, be it hereby resolved to receive and approve the adoption of the financial accounts for the year ending March 31st, 2025, as audited by Hilborn LLP. And may I have a seconder for that motion? And so with the consent of the Vice Chair, I'd like to open the meeting for discussion of the motion, if any, of the approval of the auditor's reports. Seeing no discussion, with the consent of the vice chair, then I will ask for a vote, voicing yay or nay of those entitled to vote today. So all in favor of approving the auditor's report, please say yay. Yay. And all against, please say nay. So with the consent of the vice chair, I will declare the motion carried. The next item of business is to approve appointing the same auditors for the next fiscal year. And so I am going to move as follows. Be it hereby resolved that Hilborn LLP or such other auditors as may be recommended by the resolution of the ACE Board of Directors be appointed auditors for ACE for the fiscal year of April 1st, 2025 to March 31st of 2026. Could I get someone to second that motion? Carol Cohen is seconding. So again, this is to just essentially hire the same auditors as last year. With the consent of the vice chair, I'll open the meeting for discussion on that. Seeing no one clamoring to discuss the auditors, I will ask for a vote then. Those in favor, as those able to vote, entitled to vote today, those in favor, please say yay. Yay. And those against, please say nay. All right, so with the consent of the vice chair, I will declare that resolution to be carried. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Matthew. I will now call on ACE Board Member Philippa Getty to present our fourth item of business, which is a resolution to approve the prior activities of the year.
Good evening, everyone. This item of business is a resolution to approve the acts of the prior year. I move as follows. Be it hereby resolved that all acts, contracts, bylaws, proceedings, appointments, and payments enacted, made, done, and taken by the directors and officers of the corporation since the date of the last annual general meeting, November 26, 2024, as the same are set out or referred to in the minutes of the meetings of the Board of Directors or in the financial statements submitted to this meeting, be and the same are hereby approved, ratified, and confirmed. Will someone please second the motion? Lisa Manuel seconds. With the consent of the vice chair, I now open the meeting for discussion of the resolution, if any. With no apparent questions, with the consent of the vice chair, I will now ask for a vote by voicing yay or nay by the members of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly who are entitled to vote today. All in favor, please say yay. All against, please say nay. With the consent of the vice chair, I declare the resolution carried.
Thank you, Philippa. I will now call on the Executive Director, Graham Webb, to make a presentation to each of our retiring board members.
Thank you, Dom. We have a very diverse and committed board of directors. This year, we have two of our existing 13 directors retiring from the board. And the first member is our current chair until the end of this meeting, Irene Carrier. Irene Carrier is a retired law office manager. She has sat on the board for, I think, 7 years, and she has just completed 1 year as the board chair for a second time. She was previously board chair before this as well. Irene has contributed so much to this clinic through good times and turbulent times, and she's seen both, and we'll miss Irene very much. We have Irene is not here with us tonight in person. We have a presentation that we will be sending to Irene following the meeting. Our other retiring board member is a retired journalist, Kim Caldwell, who came to our attention because of her work writing stories in local newspapers on seniors issues. We were very much impressed by Kim. Kim joined us as a director last November, and she's spent the year with us as a director, gave us some valuable advice on media relations, and participated in board meetings. She is retiring from the board as well, and that we wish to thank Kim. We will also be sending her a token of our appreciation, a memento of her service to ACE. And so thank you to all of our board, and especially to Irene Carrier and to Kim Caldwell. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Our fifth item of business is to elect the board of directors for the upcoming year. We're delighted to be welcoming our 11 returning directors and to nominate the election of one new director. I will call on ACE board member Lisa Manuel to introduce the slate of directors who have been nominated by the ACE Nominations Committee to be elected this evening. Lisa?
So this item of business is a motion to elect the board of directors for the upcoming year. I would ask our returning board members who were previously elected to a term that has not yet expired to please raise your hands if you're in the room as I call your name. Saman Jaffrey Ullman, Dominica Ozarko, Carol Cohen, Matthew Furrow, Lindsay O'Callaghan, Philippa Getty, Lisa Manuel, Jan Goddard, Melissa Almea, Lindsay Van Rosendahl, and Mark Handelman. Okay. The following new director is also nominated by the ACE Nominations Committee to be elected for a 3-year term that will expire at the annual general meeting in 2028. And that person is Alex Henderson. Alex is a Toronto lawyer with a boutique law firm and was called to the Ontario Bar in 1978. He has lectured at continuing legal education seminars for the Canadian Bar Association, Ontario, the Law Society of Ontario, and Osgoode Hall Law School. Alex first joined the ACE board in 1993 and has served in various roles over the years, including as board chair. He is pleased to rejoin the board and continues to find this work both engaging and at times challenging, particularly given the evolving legal landscape in Ontario. Okay. Are there any other nominations from the floor for candidates for election to the ACE Board of Directors? Calling once for additional nominations? Calling twice for additional nominations? Calling 3 times for additional nominations? So with the consent of the vice chair, I declare nominations closed. I move that the slate presented by the nominations committee as presented this evening be elected as follows. Nominated for a 3-year term ending 2028, Alexander Henderson. Will someone please second the motion? With the consent of the
Matthew Furrow, seconding the motion.
With the consent of the vice chair, I now open the meeting for discussion of the motion, if any. With the consent of the vice chair, I will now ask for a vote by voicing yay or nay by members of the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly who are entitled to vote today. All in favor, please say yay. Yay. All against, please say nay. With the consent of the vice chair, I declare the motion carried.
Thank you, Lisa. The formal business of the meeting is now over. With the consent of members present, I call the formal part of the meeting to a close. Thank you. I will now call on Graham Webb to present his executive director's report for the 2025 annual meeting of members.
Well, thank you, Dom, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to take the liberty of sitting down while I present my executive director's report. I think this is the first time I've done this sitting down. Usually I stand up, but you know, one time I was in court and Judge Zielinski from Owen Sound surprisingly told all the lawyers to just sit down. He said, lawyers seem to have a string attached to your chin. When you stand up, the string pulls your chin open and you feel like you have to keep talking. And we have three new members here today with us, Rosio and Angela and Romana, who had the experience of attending a speaking engagement I gave this fall at Providence Health Center, and they thought it was a good thing that I went way over time. Little did they know the frustration of my friends and colleagues when I won't speak shortly. So I'm going to try to limit myself to about 10 minutes and get on with the interesting part of the meeting, which is our panel discussion on residents' rights in retirement homes. I would like to acknowledge our staff. We have a staff of 6 lawyers, 3 licensed paralegals, and a law clerk. And as follows: myself, the executive director; Rita Krolavichus, a staff litigation lawyer who's here with us online tonight, but not here in person; Jane Meadis, staff lawyer, institutional advocate. Jane is here. Alyssa Lane, staff lawyer, institutional advocate, works with Jane, and Alyssa is home with her young family this evening. Bethany Pascudo, staff litigation lawyer. Would you raise your hand, Bethany? Stephen Caswell, staff litigation lawyer. Thank you, Stephen. Angeline Douglas, licensed paralegal, who you would have met as you come off the elevators. I don't see Angeline in the room. I think she's in the hallway still greeting people. Jocelyn Hiley, a licensed paralegal who helped us all day today, and she's at home with her young family. Kimberly Wargala, our licensed paralegal community outreach coordinator, who has taken more than the lion's share of organizing this meeting here tonight and organizing most of our events. And thank you so much, Kimberly, for doing that. We're very indebted to your skill and expertise and dedication in doing this. And also to Heather Jonason, a law clerk, who our administrative coordinator, who is at the back. And Heather has been instrumental in getting us going. And also Heather ordered all the food too. So ACE has been providing in-person services on site using a hybrid and remote staffing model since 2023. For the most part, we attend our offices on site 3 days per week, and our staff work remotely from home the other 2 days a week. Our offices are staffed in person on site Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and our phones are live answered throughout the day. We do receive a very high volume of calls, and it's not always possible for us to answer all incoming calls live while we're on the line with other callers. And for that reason, we still have many calls go to voicemail. However, it is our goal and our practice to answer as many live calls as humanly possible and to be available in person on site to visitors throughout regular business hours. We value the in-person experience with our older adult clients and the other callers. Many of our clients and our older adult callers have sensory impairments and a genuine preference to tell their stories and receive legal advice in person. And it's always our great pleasure to serve them in person as well. Direct personal service is a core value of ACE and its staff. Since 2023, ACE has been located here at the Cooperative of Specialty Legal Clinics of Ontario at 55 University Avenue, at the corner of University and Wellington, walking distance from Union Station, and steps away from St. Andrew subway station. We moved into our new premises on May 27, 2023, and opened the doors to the public the next week. We call this place 55U, and this is our 4th office in our clinic's history. We incorporated in 1984 as the Holly Street Advocacy Centre for the Elderly, Inc., because our first offices were at 40 Holly Street, near the corner of Yonge and Eglinton in North Toronto. Soon after that, we moved to larger offices at 120 Eglinton Avenue East, where we worked until 1997. We were then located at 2 Carleton Street in the old CAA building at the corner of Yonge and College for some 26 years until we moved to our present premises in 2023. After a lengthy initial period of construction of our build out and move, our landlord then installed new energy efficient exterior windows throughout the entire building at 55U, and that caused significant disruption to on-site operations. However, all of the construction is now complete. Our new lease at 55U extends at least until 2031, and we hope that will carry us into the indefinite future with rights of renewal that we have. Our mission and purpose: the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly is committed to upholding the rights of low-income seniors. Its purpose is to improve the quality of life of seniors by providing legal services, which include direct client assistance, public legal education, law reform, community development, and community organizing. During the past year, ACE fulfilled the mandate of direct client services, law reform, and public legal education in a wide variety of ways, including the following. ACE continues to advise and represent a high volume of callers on elder law issues and in its traditional areas of practice, including long-term care homes, retirement homes, home care, consent, capacity, and substitute decision-making, adult guardianship law, power of attorney disputes, federal income security programs, consumer protection, elder abuse, and other areas of elder law. ACE is a critical resource for long-term care home residents and their advocates and persons facing discharge from hospital to inappropriate discharge destinations, as there are very few other resources available for low-income seniors on these important issues. ACE continues to fill a significant gap in this important area of law. In fact, I often say, and I've said before, and I say here again tonight, that all of the work we do is important. The consumer protection work we do is important. The intake work we do is important. The public speaking and the policy work we do is important. But I don't think anything is as important or more important than the long-term care and hospital discharge work that we do, because that need is just not served elsewhere. There's nowhere else for people to go from the consumer side when they need advice on long-term care and hospital discharge issues. And so congratulations to all of our staff for doing your work so well, and especially to Jane and Alyssa for carrying the ball on the long-term care and hospital discharge issues. ACE has devoted countless hours of legal advice and representation to low-income seniors, sometimes facing eviction from their own homes due to fraudulent and abusive liens, mortgages, and notices of security interest. In many cases, ACE conducted complex superior court litigation on behalf of our older adult clients, and often with highly successful results. This work has dominated the casework of our litigation lawyers and paralegals throughout the past several years during the pandemic. ACE is acting as co-counsel with Sotos LLP on 2 class action lawsuits, including, they're pending certification. That's correct, Bethany? They're still pending certification? Pardon me? Proposed class actions, yes. And these class actions are for consumer protection violations against Finance It Canada Inc. and Vault Home Credit Corporation. These actions are brought on behalf of homeowner victims of widespread predatory door-to-door practices, lured by promises of government rebates, energy savings, and free repairs, quote, free repairs. The unsuspecting homeowners instead find themselves locked into long-term improvident loans with none of the promised rebates or savings. Many of the victims are elderly homeowners who are unable to pay these predatory loans. ACE co-presented with the Ontario Bar Association and the Law Society of Ontario the 2025 ACE special lecture on a lawyer's standard of care to vulnerable older clients, recognizing and preventing exploitative and abusive property transactions. This 90-minute panel discussion was held at the OBA Conference Centre and live streamed to hundreds of registrants online on September 25, 2025. It is accredited by the Law Society for 30 minutes of professionalism content and 1 hour of EDI content. And I say is accredited because it's still available. The 2025 ACE special lecture is available through the ACE YouTube channel, available through our website. And here I pause when I'm speaking of this consumer protection work. It doesn't happen by accident. The callers to our clinic since 2020 have been remote, so we had no physical doors, but through the telephone lines. Angie and Jocelyn, our paralegals who have handled the intake lines, have taken hundreds and hundreds of calls. And over the past 2 years, we've been very fortunate to hire 2 really highly capable staff litigation lawyers, Bethany and Stephen, who are amazing in their work. I was doing their job from 1985 to 2016, and I can tell you that I've never done that job as well as they do it now. Bethany in particular is our lawyer who is acting as co-counsel with Sotos on the finance and vault pay proposed class actions. They recruited her because of Bethany's profile in doing this work. She's well known throughout the consumer protection bar for the work that she does. And in fact, after our special lecture, I don't want to say this before we get our budget increase for any pay increases, but I was strongly advised by the private practice lawyers practicing in the area not to let them go, because we have these 2 good young lawyers, and they fear that we're going to lose them back to the private bar if we're not careful. Another thing that we did is the ACE and the Ontario Health Coalition brought an application to the Superior Court challenging the constitutional validity of Bill 7, the More Beds, Better Care Act. Unfortunately, we were not successful in this challenge, which really had to be brought. The court upheld the constitutional validity of this legislation that authorizes placement coordinators to commence applications and choose long-term care homes on behalf of hospitalized seniors without obtaining the consent of the senior or their substitute decision makers, and with the threat of a $400 per day charge if they refuse one of those bed offers and remain in hospital. This legislation disproportionately affects the rights of vulnerable older adults who make up the majority of patients subject to this law. While we acknowledge the court's decision, we remain steadfast in our commitment to advocating for seniors in hospitals and long-term care homes. The fight for dignity, autonomy, and fair treatment in Ontario's healthcare system is far from over. ACE is honored that our staff lawyer, institutional advocate Jane Meadus, was the 2025 Ontario Bar Association Award for Excellence in Elder Law winner. This follows the same award in 2024 given to our founding executive director, the late Judith Wall. And it's a very rare accomplishment that such a prestigious award should be made to both Judith and Jane in consecutive years. And here I'd like just to pause and pay tribute to Jane for this accomplishment. ACE has been hosting an online survey for the Ontario Courts Accessibility Committee since May 2021. It's available online through our website. And again, this is one of our initiatives that would not have been technically possible to us without the skill and expertise of Kimberly Wargala, who was able to figure out how to do this and guide us through it. Otherwise, we would not have had a clue. This important survey is designed to measure and report on the lived experience of persons with disabilities in all levels of Ontario courts. It consists of 19 questions that continue to receive responses on an ongoing basis. And of interest, just yesterday, I presented, I had been recruited by Associate Chief Justice of Ontario, Mikhail Fairburn, to present online with herself, Justice Ted Kelly, and Jason Michel, another lawyer advocate, on an Accessibility Week concerning the work of the Ontario Courts Accessibility Committee. And the ask of us was to present about this important online survey that the Ontario Courts Accessibility Committee and the Ontario Courts are promoting throughout Ontario to give feedback to the OCAC, the Ontario Courts Accessibility Committee, about what kind of supports people need and what is happening in the system. ACE made submissions at the invitation of the Civil Rules Review Committee on Phase 2 consultation for a civil rules review, which is a multi-year project intended to modernize and simplify the rules of civil procedure in Superior Court. ACE attended quarterly meetings of the Ontario Courts Accessibility Committee, consisting of the Assistant Deputy Attorney General for Court Services, the Associate Chief Justice of Ontario, judges and officials from every level of court, and a wide range of community stakeholders to improve accessibility for persons with disability in Ontario courts. ACE participates as a standing member of the Ontario Public Guardian and Trustees Guardianship Advisory Committee. As a member of ACE staff participates as a member of the Retirement Homes Regulatory Authority Stakeholder Advisory Council, a statutory advisory body under the Retirement Homes Act that meets quarterly to give advice to our RHRA board and management. And here our representative appointed by the RHRA is Bethany Pascudo. She's under an oath of confidentiality. She can't tell us what actually happens at these meetings. They're privileged and confidential to the RHRA. We respect that. I was on the same committee for 6 years and was the chair for the last 2 years. And I'm happy to say that we have on our board of directors our vice chair, Dom Ozarko, who now holds a different position, but she at one time had been the person who guided the RHRA Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And I'm looking for Curtis. Is Curtis here tonight? Sorry? Okay. So we have a fairly close relationship with the RHRA. They see the world from a different lens through us, but we do consider them in part our partners in looking out for the same populations that we both care about. ACE participates, ACE participates in other stakeholder advisory groups, such as the Toronto Seniors Assembly and the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility Stakeholder Advisory Committee. ACE consulted with and or made submissions to federal and provincial agencies, such as, for the first time, the Federal Competition Bureau asked us for a consultation on a proposed merger of a Canadian retirement home chain presently operating in Ontario with a large American owner. We've never heard from the Competition Bureau before. It was something new to us. A federal, provincial, territorial forum on financial abuse of older adults, focusing on powers of attorney. The Ontario Ministry of Finance on proposed regulations concerning preferred pharmacy provider networks. The Ontario Ministry of Long-Term Care on the Supporting Seniors and Caregivers Act and the Fixing Long-Term Care Act. And the Ontario Ministry of Long-Term Care concerning proposed regulations on limiting and reducing the publication period for long-term care home inspection reports, which, by the way, would expunge from the public record inspection reports of long-term care homes that happened during the pandemic when the military moved in. ACE made a joint statement with our sister clinics, the Canadian Environmental Law Association and the Advocacy Centre for Tenants in Ontario, and other community advocacy groups on the Toronto heat safety and the City of Toronto heat relief strategy. ACE staff are here again. Kimberly is co-chairing and organizing an upcoming 2-day clinic training conference. ACE participates as a member of the Law Enforcement Agencies and Partners Protecting Seniors group, which meets monthly. ACE continued with presentations to the Ontario Bar Association, the Canadian Bar Association, the Law Society of Ontario, and Osgood Professional Development, continuing education programs and courses, as well as public events, including extensive work as a professional development program co-chair. ACE continues to maintain our website, which is updated on at least a monthly basis. We field requests for comment in the media and for comments at Queen's Park. In addition to this, the main core of our services is we address thousands of intake calls and the need for legal representation of individual clients on a variety of serious legal issues. It may sound as though from all the many diverse things I've spoken about that the client work would be on the edge of our desk, but it's actually the other way around. Our callers and the clients are the center of all we do. What comes to us from our community is what informs us and sets our priorities. This year, the ACE board and staff have undertaken a process to develop a new strategic plan for our agency. We've defined the scope of the project and dedicated resources to it. We are now preparing to issue a request for proposals for a consultant to guide us in making a new strategic plan for the upcoming years. And in addition to the wide range of client, community, legal education, and policy work reported, ACE has been active in many other client matters, legal education and policy initiatives affecting the rights and seniors of older adults. I only had 5 minutes, 7 minutes ago. And before I stop, I need to say thank you to our board of directors. ACE is a nonprofit charitable corporation. We're funded by Legal Aid Ontario under the Legal Aid Services Act. We're governed by a volunteer board of directors consisting of a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 15 persons, the majority of whom are over age 55 years of age. Lisa Manuel has already read out our membership, and I won't do that again. Some of our board members have already served many years on the ACE board, and many others were newly recruited last year and are completing their first year of service. ACE board members come from many different backgrounds, and they bring a wide range of skills and expertise to the governance of the agency. All ACE board members have demonstrated exceptional commitment and participation for the past year, well prepared, and with near perfect attendance at all board meetings. We thank them all for their generous dedication and service. And here I'd like to please give a round of applause to our ACE board members. We're grateful for the continuing support of our board, our members, our community partners, our friends, and benefactors. Most importantly, we are grateful for the privilege and opportunity to serve older adults and others concerned with their care and well-being who come to our clinic for assistance. We look forward to continuing with our work in the upcoming year. Thank you. That was only 10 minutes, wasn't it? I'd like next to move to our panel discussion on ACE answers your retirement home questions, residents' rights to visiting, returning home, and housing security. And to give our presentation this evening, I'd like to call forward our staff lawyer, institutional advocate, Jane Meadis, who you've heard much about, and our staff litigation lawyer, Bethany Pascuto, who you've also heard about this evening. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Jane and to Bethany. And here I'm going to actually leave the stage and ask Jane and Bethany to take things over from here.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Where's my notes? I did want to just mention that on the heat issue, the City of Toronto heat thing, the 3 clinics were successful in getting, I think it was 500, is that right, Kimberly? 500 air conditioners put into apartments of seniors who are low income. And it was, I think our office really had a lot of impact on that, getting it done very quickly. I did not believe it was going to happen. I really didn't. I've worked with government for 30 years. I did not believe they were going to be able to do it. And they did it between May is when the proposal went, and they distributed them in July. The government doesn't work that fast. And it was a very, very successful program. We're hoping that they'll continue. We don't know if they're going to do that again, but we really, really want them to do that, because we think that things like, cooling rooms and stuff aren't sufficient. And we're pressing for, change in legislation for upper minimums on heat and stuff. But it was a very successful program. And I know Kimberly really was, I said a lot at meetings, but I didn't. Kimberly again was the big organizer for the whole thing, and she did a great job. And I think it's up to her that we really were able to get those 500 in. And so a big round of applause for Kimberly. But that's not what we're talking about. Okay, so I'm gonna get my little speaker clock so that I don't go over my time. Righty, here we go. There we go. Okay, does it work?
Well,
there we go.
While you do that, I'm just going to say we just received an email from the Law Society, and this presentation we've been awarded 1 hour of EDI. So any lawyers in the building
and paralegals,
you can claim this as EDI credits for continuing education.
Great, thank you. I have this little speaker clock that tells me how long I have. It's great. Okay, so I'm going to sort of do the introduction on retirement homes and stuff, and then Bethany's going to talk about remedies. I think that's what she's talking about. Okay, good. So first of all, we want to talk about what the difference was between a retirement home and a long-term care home, because there's a real confusion around that a lot of the time, especially if you're in a hospital. Hospitals really push people to go to retirement homes, telling them, oh, they're just like long-term care homes, which they're not at all. So retirement homes are tenancies. That's like the very premise of it. They're tenancies. They're not healthcare facilities. They do provide healthcare, but they're not healthcare facilities. Whereas long-term care homes are healthcare facilities, part of our healthcare in the province of Ontario. And they are not tenancies. So you don't have the rights of tenants when you live in a long-term care home. Retirement homes are governed by a bunch of legislation, including the Residential Tenancies Act, the Retirement Homes Act, and they're also within the the Residential Tenancies Act. They're a special kind of home called a care home. And so there's specific sections of that act that deal with care homes, and retirement homes are a subset of that. So the care home rules also apply to there. Long-term care homes act. Long-term care homes are governed by the Fixing Long-Term Care Act. Oversight is different. So the oversight, as you heard, is from the Retirement Home Regulatory Authority with compliance to the Retirement Homes Act, whereas the Ministry of Long-Term Care oversees long-term care. Both of them do have websites that have the compliance reports that you can see. Currently, long-term care goes back to 2010, and I believe that the retirement homes go back to the, can't remember the year, maybe 2011-ish, when they, is that right? Yeah. When the licenses first went out. The Landlord and Tenant Board deals with tenancy issues for retirement homes. Residents of retirement homes have all the same rights of a tenant that anyone else has. Eligibility for long-term care homes, that's under the Fixing Long-Term Care Act, and you have to apply through the what's on now currently called Ontario Health at Home. It's probably had about 10 names since I started 30 years ago. And you have to meet certain requirements, such as being 18 and older, have OHIP, and meet the criteria. Retirement homes they're private. Most retirement homes, but not all, are privately held and for profit. So they get to decide who they want to rent to. They do have to do so within confines of other legislation like human rights code. So for things like we get people who are told, you know, we don't take people with wheelchairs. That would be contrary to the human rights code unless they can show that they can't accommodate it under that legislation. They also have to meet, there's usually an age criteria, which is allowed under the legislation. Under the human rights code, you're allowed to have like a 55 plus or 60 plus building. Both retirement homes and long-term care homes, for the most part, municipal long-term care homes don't have to be licensed, but other than that, both retirement homes and long-term care homes are licensed. Retirement homes through the Retirement Home Regulatory Authority, and long-term care homes through the Ministry of Long-Term Care. Cost is a big difference. So when somebody calls and they're not sure what they're in, because they often don't know, I will ask them, how much do they pay? And when they tell me they pay $7,000 a month, I know they're in a retirement home, because the costs are specific for long-term care. You only pay for accommodation and food, and all the care and services are provided. Whereas in a retirement home, you're paying for everything. The cost is set by the operator. They have to separate out the rent portion and the care portion in a home. The rent portion may be covered by rent control if the building was occupied prior to November 15, 2018. If it's after that, no rent control. So if you're moving into one of these brand new buildings, no rent control. So that's a bit of a problem right now, because they can raise the rate whatever they want on those, but of course still only once a year. The care portion can be raised anytime with 90 days notice. There's no maximum number of times. Most homes, when you go in, have a base package that you have to purchase, but then you can also apply, add a la carte services. An example for that could be maybe you're not getting help with bathing. You didn't pay for that in your package, but now you need it. Or maybe you get sick and you need rooms like tray service in your room. You would have to pay for every time that tray was delivered to your room. So what is a retirement home? It's a residential complex, which is occupied primarily by people over the age of 65. And they have to have certain kinds of services, and the care services are set out in the legislation and the regulations as to which services you have to be compliant. There has to be at least 2 of the services in the list for that. It could include services provided by the Ontario Health at Home, but it's usually provided by the service provider or a contractor on their behalf. But you do not have to purchase extra services from the home. So you can actually purchase, so you get the base package, you can get stuff from the from Ontario Health at Home. You could hire your own private caregiver. The home can't prevent you from doing that. Sorry, I just have a lot of legislation in here just in case I needed to remind myself. So as I said, retirement homes are also care homes under the Residential Tenancies Act, Part 9. And there are special rules that relate only to care homes. So a care home is a home where you get services, and the services are defined under that act differently than what they would be under the Retirement Homes Act. So they have to meet both. But you could have like a group home, for example, might be a care home. So there's a bunch of subsets of different kinds of care homes, but a retirement home is one of the types of care homes. So they have to have things like, they have to have a written tenancy agreement. They have to set out in the agreement the cost of the rent versus the cost of the care service. We find very often that it's all bunched together, so you don't know how much is the care services and how much is the rent. That's really important, for example, to do with when services are being increased, when the amount, what they're being charged is being increased. Prior to admission, you have to have something called the Care Home Information Package, or CHIP, and the contents of that package are set out in legislation. If they don't provide you with the CHIP, they can't raise your rent or your service charges until you're provided with that document. So it's very important that they do provide that. The agreements do have to state, for example, that you have to have a written agreement, and the agreement also has to tell you that you have a right to consult with a third party, and you have 5 days to cancel the agreement after you enter into it. So there's like a bit of a clause to get out because some of these places do have very high pressure sales tactics. If you want to have, for example, like your landlord come into your room they can't do that without your consent. These are tenancies. There's like a bit of a clause to get out because some of these places do have. They can't just come in your room, and in a lot of places they do, unfortunately. They will come into people's rooms without consent. You can contract with them to do that. So you can approve them to come in and do regular checks in your room. But if you don't consent, they can't come into your room without that. So consent capacity issues are big in a retirement home. Many retirement homes really don't kind of acknowledge that they're tenancies. They think that they're sort of some kind of hybrid care facility. And so we do have a lot of issues where they come and they tell people all sorts of things that aren't true, and they make up all these policies that don't comply with the law. So when it comes to, for example, consent to treatment, the same rules apply as in any other consent healthcare setting. So whether you're with your family doctor, with a physiotherapist in their offices, they have to comply with the Healthcare Consent Act. So they can't give treatment without informed consent. The health practitioner, if they don't think you're capable, they determine your capacity. They have to advise you that you've been found incapable and that you have a right to apply to the Consent Capacity Board for a hearing. And then if you're incapable, the substitute decision maker in the list in the Healthcare Consent Act, Section 20, they will make the decision for you. There's also another part in the Healthcare Consent Act that applies, and a lot of people miss this because it always applied. It's called personal assistance services. It always applied to long-term care homes, but when they brought in the regulations, they snuck it into this little section in the regulations that's really hard to find. So personal assistance services as defined in the Healthcare Consent Act, which are things like assistance or supervision with hygiene, washing, dressing, grooming, eating, drinking, that sort of thing. They can also be subject to findings of incapacity and substitute decision making. They may need to get substitute consent. It's not mandatory in all situations. So if you were in a retirement home and you didn't have someone who was consenting, like they didn't contact a family member or something, you were incapable, they can still feed you and put you to bed and wash you. It's really where there's issues around that. So let's say you're diabetic and you want to eat sweets and they don't think you should, they would have to get substitute consent in order to, if you're incapable of making that decision yourself, they would have to get substitute consent. And also the PGT isn't mandatory as the substitute decision maker. It's a may, not a shall, as opposed to under healthcare consent, where if there's no one else to make decisions, it shall be the public guardian and trustee. It's in that situation, it's an evaluator in the home, and that's a subset of health professionals that can make a finding of incapacity. And again, if you are found incapable of something, you do have a right to a hearing before the Consent Capacity Board. I did one once. It was a hearing for, it was in long-term care, but where they were trying to remove a mobility device from my client because he was running staff over with it. And so they said, well, we're going to remove you. We found you incapable. We're going to remove it. And we're going to leave you in bed as sort of a punishment for an hour and 2 hours and all sorts of things. And I said that was illegal. He was capable. They found him incapable, went to a substitute. They consented. We went before the board. And I argued that, in fact, my client was not incapable. He was just mean. And he was doing it on purpose. And if they wanted to do anything, they would have to call the police. And the board agreed with me and found him capable. What the police would have done with him because he was extremely disabled, I don't know. But, you know, so that's sort of, they're not very, they're few and far between, but we did do it because it was an issue around ambulation. Admission is an issue for retirement homes. So the Healthcare Consent Act doesn't apply. So if a person doesn't have a guardian of the person or attorney for personal care who's consenting to, who has the authority to consent to housing, there is no substitute decision maker. So if you have an incapable person who requires a retirement home, there is no official person to consent. And so what happens is most people are just sort of moved in. If they're incapable, they're sort of moved in and they don't complain. But if someone says, I don't want to go in, there's really no way to do that admission for them. People have a lot of rights in retirement homes. They have the same rights as a tenant. All the rules under the Residential Tenancies Act apply. And the Retirement Home Act actually indicates that the Residential Tenancies Act supersedes the Retirement Home Act. So if there's any conflict, you look at the Residential Tenancies Act. There's a whole Bill of Rights in Section 51. Bill of Rights, whether it's in long-term care or retirement homes, it doesn't really mean a lot. They're all rights you would have even if they weren't written in. But the problem is when it comes to seniors, especially, they seem to think that once you turn, I don't know, 65 or something, you lose rights in our society. And so they've had to write these things in so that but the homes go, oh, it's in our legislation, so I guess they have this right to do things. So there's a whole list of rights. There's a lot of requirements under the Retirement Homes Act. They have to have assessments and care plans. They are allowed to have a residence council, so the home can't stop them from doing that. There's training requirements around staff, protection against abuse and neglect, and promotion of zero tolerance. They have a lot of compliance standards to comply with. One of the differences in retirement homes is around termination of tenancies. So if anybody's rented here, which is probably most of us have rented at some time in our life, you have to wait till the end of a period. Like, so if you have a 1-year lease, it's hard to get out of it. But once after that, you probably go month to month, but you still have to give a fairly long period of time if you're giving notice. In a retirement home, you only have to give 30 days notice, and it can be from any point in time in your tenancy. And you can terminate your care services with 10 days notice. So if you say you're in a hospital and you're not going to go back to the home, you can say we're giving our 30 days notice for terminating the tenancy. We're giving you 10 days notice for the care and services. And then after that 10 days, you don't have to pay for them. And if a resident dies, the estate is not responsible for the care and services after 10 days. It doesn't even require like any kind of a notification. So you can, that's a good thing. Like you can, you have a 30-day notice. It's still short because if you're going into long-term care, you probably get 24 hours to make a decision and like 5 days to move in. So at least it's a bit shorter. Evictions by landlord, all the same things apply. And Bethany's going to talk about all this stuff, I hope. But there are special rules around care homes regarding things like demolition and conversion, which Bethany will speak about. But there's also special evictions under care home sections, which are called transfers. But one of the things that we run into all the time, and especially for patients who are in hospital, so people go from retirement home into the hospital, and then they're told they're not allowed to return to the retirement home. That's illegal. They're tenants. The landlord cannot stop you from returning. And they also can't move you within the home. We hear that a lot. Well, we're going to move you to the 5th floor because you need more care. You have security of tenure. They can't do that. As I indicated before, you can have outside services. There are certain homes, and I know of one chain where they basically have barred Ontario Health at Home from coming in, and which is totally illegal, but Ontario Health at Home doesn't seem to want to push back. And I think that would be a complaint to the RHRA if that happens. So, but you're entitled to have any external people you want. Restrictions in a retirement home, they can't prevent you from coming and going. They're your landlord, they're not your jailer. There is no authority to detain by a long-term retirement home, except for in an emergency. So if somebody was, run across the street or something. So all these locked units within retirement homes are actually illegal. And the act is actually pretty specific that you can't confine people. There was an attempt to put in some restraint legislation around restraint and detention. And they put it into the Healthcare Consent Act. It disappeared. And it's also disappeared from the Retirement Homes Act for some technical legal reasons. So there is no authority to do that. The section, in order to do it, it's actually not legal in long-term care either, to tell you the truth. And in order to be legal, you'd have to have rights advice and a whole bunch of other things that they don't do yet. They've passed it, but not enacted it. So I've said I'm not going to retire until they enact it. So if the government wants to get rid of me, they better enact it. And then just the final thing that I was going to talk about was trespass to property. We see a lot of stuff in the media about people being trespassed. And I know some people in this room have some experience in this in the long-term care area, where they can't do it either. But landlords cannot trespass visitors in a retirement home. It's a tenancy. There's a case called Cunningham and Whitby Christian Homes, which was a 1997 decision of the Ontario Court General Division, which very clearly stated that a landlord has no authority to trespass tenants, visitors. The tenants have a right to have guests and can't be superseded by the landlord. And it's a breach of their right to quiet enjoyment of the property. We see it happen all the time. The police will come in, they will ticket people because the landlord has issued a trespass notice, but it is not legal. And so we try to get police trained and things like that. But it doesn't always happen. And I'm 23 seconds early. It's your turn.
Yes, would you please put this doom clock on for me? Okay. Great, going last on a warm late evening. So Jane has told us a little bit about our rights. I'd like to talk about enforcing those rights. When I thought about how to start this section, I thought about, well, let's throw out some of the acronyms. The RTA, LTB, RHRA, HRT, and what does all this mean? And just thinking about what it's like to be a senior living in a retirement home and not knowing what all these acronyms mean, where to go, who does what, how to enforce your rights. And I guess in somewhat of an ironic streak, I was on a settlement conference today in the small claims court, and the judge admonished me for using an acronym in my pleading. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, I don't think I used an acronym in my pleading, but it was very possible. And he says, what does HVAC mean? And then I had to go and explain to him what I meant by HVAC, maybe an air conditioner and a furnace and maybe a little water filter. And I was like, it's just a term of art, that we're using. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, if a judge doesn't know what HVAC means, how can we expect people to know what all these little acronyms mean when they're enforcing their rights? So Jane talked about retirement homes being a care home. So I'm happy to skip that generally. But when it's defined in the Residential Tenancies Act, which is the RTA, it's defined as a residential complex that is occupied or intended to be occupied by persons for the purpose of receiving care services, whether or not receiving the services is the primary purpose of the occupancy. And there is some case law, and actually quite recent case law, when an individual moves into a retirement home and they're not receiving care services, they're quite independent, but that changes over time. And the retirement home provides them with some services like a call button, or the staff is helping the resident without prompting when they're having safety issues, or they're participating in social programs. And at some point there was an eviction issue, and the definition of the retirement home as a care home was challenged by the home, and it was found by the landlord tenant board to be in fact a care home, regardless of the fact that that's not the primary purpose why this resident moved in. But he did at some point receive care services, whether or not they were a part of his tenancy agreement. So generally, if you're in a retirement home, it's going to be a care home. And because it falls under the Residential Tenancies Act, there are only certain ways that you can be evicted. It's not like a long-term care home where you cannot be evicted, where it's part of the healthcare system. You can be evicted from a retirement home, and it does happen. I mean, there are situations where people are evicted for cause. You're not paying your rent, you're not paying your care fees, which is defined as being part of the rent under the act. You're interfering with the reasonable enjoyment of other residents. I represented someone before the landlord tenant board before I was here, who was making comments to people that made them uncomfortable year after year after year, and they did eventually successfully evict him. Whether or not, I argued that he was in fact a vulnerable party against the large landlord of the retirement home. But outside of these cause evictions, which are, I would say, relatively rare, there are larger issues that we're seeing right now in terms of mass scale evictions. The one thing that we're facing quite commonly is the reno evictions. I think we've termed it, at least in the GTA, the practice of landlord evicting a tenant to perform renovations, often with the sole purpose of increasing the rent. Now, in order to do so, the retirement home needs to follow the guidelines under the Residential Tenancies Act. They need to give at least 120 days warning to the residents and offer compensation. And I believe it's 3 months of rent and compensation. And this is the one part that seems to often be missing in any context, but especially in the retirement homes context. These individuals, these tenants or residents, have the right to return to the unit at the original rent after renovations are complete. And that does not seem to be communicated to people when they get these notices. There are situations, of course, when the unit's not the same. How extensive are these renovations? Are you turning a 100-unit building into 30 condos, right? And then we fall more into the demolition aspect, which has its own requirements and regulations. And there are decisions that differentiate between what a renovation is and what a demolition is. Because in the demolition scenario, you don't have that same unit to return to. So you can't be returning to the same unit at the same price. There are also city bylaws. Toronto has enacted some relatively strict bylaws on reno evictions that apply. So whatever city you're in, you should make sure to look at the local bylaws. And beyond the reno evictions and the demolitions, we have the fact, as Jane mentioned, that most retirement homes are a for-profit business. They need to be profitable to pay their employees, to compensate their shareholders. So what happens when they aren't profitable? Well, they can go out of business, or the owner can sell the property. And we're seeing both happen. I think there was a case, I'm not sure where it was exactly, where it looked like the manager was siphoning off most of the funds from defrauding the retirement home business, and they went out of business. So they shut down the home because they couldn't possibly afford to run. And then we have also some of the retirement homes selling to developers. So I think one of the big ones that hit the news last year, or maybe even earlier this year, I think Chartwell Heritage Glen sold to Minto to be converted into 300 plus units for all ages. And that left 200 seniors scrambling for a place to live. And there are people who had lived in that building for more than 20 years. So first of all, it was their home. This is where they knew. This is where they had friends and neighbors. Also, their rent was really cheap. And they were never going to find a new home with similar rent. And the reality is that private companies running retirement homes are allowed to cease operations as long as they comply with provincial rules to provide appropriate notice and a resident transition plan within 100 days of closing. So you get your 4 months notice, you give the plan to the RHRA, and you also get your 3 months rent paid back. In the case of Chartwell Glen, I believe they found most residents a new place to live. But again, I imagine nothing near what they were paying before. The other option, of course, if they're not tearing the building down or doing extensive renovations, is you actually technically, again, you're a tenant, you can remain. Just because the building is being sold like any other landlord selling to another landlord, you can remain if there's no significant renovations or demolition going on. You just won't have access to those care services anymore because it's no longer being run as a retirement home. So the realistic option of remaining is often not realistic. But for some people who aren't not really taking that many care services, they do technically have the right to remain. Again, not necessarily communicated to the people who are being evicted. Transfers. Jane mentioned that there was something kind of special dealing with transfers in the Residential Tenancies Act. So another thing that we've been seeing a lot in Ontario is the expansion of services being provided by retirement residents due to the aging population and long wait lists in long-term care. So a lot of retirement homes are providing a lot more, they're providing a broader care services than they had been historically. However, when there is an individual who is in a retirement home and the retirement home can no longer meet those person's care needs and they want to transfer them, they can't just say, you got to get out of here. You actually do need to bring an application before the landlord and tenant board. And that transfer will only be granted if there's an appropriate alternative accommodation available. So you need to have found them a spot somewhere else. And the retirement home is not able to provide the level of care that they need. And that's not just what they can do in-house, but also bringing in community-based services. So there is a standard to meet and an application that needs to be brought if the individual is not voluntarily going to leave. Just to do a general notice for eviction is actually being found to be prima facie or on its face discriminatory, because you're technically trying to evict a person based on their disability. And this transfer and this application can actually be also used when a tenant is not using care services. So if you have a retirement home that is providing care services and that resident does not need those care services, the same process can be used to say, you know, you don't necessarily fall within the scope of what our home is providing and you should be going elsewhere. So beyond the landlord and tenant board where you can seek to enforce your rights under the Residential Tenancies Act, there are other complaints avenues for enforcement. And one of those is the I can't remember my own acronyms, the RHRA, Retirement Home Regulatory Authority. And that's where you go, and that's what a retirement home resident should go when a retirement home has not followed the Retirement Homes Act or its regulations. As Jane mentioned, there is a Bill of Rights that set out what your rights are. Yes, they're rights that everyone have, but they are set out here. And they are considered a contract that the resident has entered into with the home. So they can be enforced in the same way a contract could be. So the retirement home breaches one of these bills of rights, you've breached a contract with me, the resident. And the RHRA, I mean, they deal with issues. They don't deal with eviction issues. So don't go to them with stuff that belongs on the landlord tenant board, but they deal with everything that's under the Retirement Homes Act or its regulations. And in the last, I guess their last annual report, they reported the top 5 type of complaints they get. The first was improper or competent treatment of or care of a resident. So like a prescription is improperly entered into electronic system and the wrong dosage given to a resident. That's the #1 complaint. Number 2, abuse and neglect of a resident. For example, 911 or emergency services were not called when they should have been. 3, administrative issues. Insufficient communication between the retirement home staff and a resident substitute decision maker after their hospital transfer, as an example. 4, a retirement home's own complaint procedures. So perhaps someone made a complaint at a retirement home and the retirement home didn't address it in a way that met the residents' needs. And then 5, food issues. So poor quality of food, not enough food, doesn't meet their dietary needs. So these are really the types of complaints that you should be directing towards the RHRA to deal with. And there is a specific process that you should be following when you're making a complaint. First, make it to the retirement home. Once they're aware of the complaint, they have 10 business days to acknowledge your complaint and let you know how they plan to resolve the issue, when the issue will be resolved, and if they believe the complaint is unfounded. And if they believe it's unfounded, they have to explain why. They can't just say, you know, too bad, so sad, we don't want to look into it. If it's not resolved, the resident doesn't feel it's resolved, you go to the RHRA, you escalate it up, and there are protections for whistleblowers that the RHRA provides and the Act provides. And what will the RHRA do? They'll request information from the retirement home. They may conduct an inspection. They may attempt to mediate or resolve the dispute. And there are certain requirements if an inspection is done in terms of deadlines and how the report is finalized and all that information, which we could get into, but I don't want to drag you guys through any more details. Then eventually, if you don't agree with the RHRA's decision, you can escalate it further to the complaints review officer. So it's not the RHRA is not where it necessarily stops if you don't feel like you've got the appropriate resolution. And beyond the RHRA and the landlord tenant board, there is a human rights tribunal. Although the reasonable enjoyment standard has been set out by the Residential Tenancies Act, where residents have specific requirements based on their religion or ethnic origin or other human rights code grounds, these must be accommodated to the point of undue hardship. The Supreme Court of Canada has established that code-related needs must be accommodated based on individualized need and set out a 3-step test for examining whether the duty to accommodate has been met. So in the context of retirement homes, and as we talked about, and this especially comes up when people are exceeding, or the retirement home is alleging that the resident is exceeding the care needs, there needs to be a duty to accommodate to the point of undue hardship. So anything less than that would technically be a violation of the Human Rights Code, and residents, if they feel like their rights are being violated, can in fact bring their matter before the Human Rights Tribunal. As one final note, there is a lot of talk about balancing residents' rights with risk management at homes. And I think that's when a lot of the stuff, especially during COVID, came up, restricting movement, restricting access. So violating residents' rights in favor of risk management. As Jane mentioned, there is no right to restrict visitors in common areas, even of the retirement home, if the resident has invited them in. And Jane cited the case law there, which she knows very well, and I've seen her quoted in articles, and that's where I got my information from. And more recently, I think issues of wellness checks. Coming in to check on the resident to see if they're doing okay. Well, I mean, just like if you live in an apartment building and the landlord is going to come in and check on you, you need your consent. If you're capable of giving that consent, otherwise it's your substitute decision maker. You can't just open the door and barge in. They can't just leave doors ajar to make it easy and convenient for them to check on. There are privacy rights that the retirement home needs to keep in mind, and restricting movement. This is something that generally came up during COVID, but it's still an issue on a one-off basis here. I mean, we had White Cliff Terrace retirement residents that removed handles from the door so residents could not leave their rooms. It was a response to COVID and concerns about residents with cognitive impairment not understanding the measures put in place to stop COVID. While the general manager was charged criminally with 2 counts of unlawful confinement, there is no authority to restrain individuals to their room. Could you imagine if there'd been a fire? Even beyond that, I mean, if I want to leave my room, I should be able to leave my room, but the potential negative impacts of that is disgusting. On that high note, I leave it for that, and any questions, comments, etc.
I just had a couple of comments after that. Just to clarify, I think you alluded to it, but I'm not sure that you specifically said that when a care home is, the termination is for demolition, conversion, or repairs, there's actually a duty on the landlord to help you find a new place. And I don't know if you said that exactly or not, but you alluded to it.
A transition plan. Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm going to actually ask Dom, because I think I know the answer, but I'm not 100% sure, is what happens if a care provider, a retirement home operator, stops providing services. So I remember the first case that this happened to that I became aware of was a case in Kingston where the landlord just sort of walked away, stopped paying staff, didn't have any food in the home. And the community, I think it was over it was over a long weekend. I think it was like the September long weekend, if I remember correctly. And these people had no food. Somebody in the home was ordering pizza on their credit card. They had a credit card and they were ordering for all the residents. And there was nothing in place really to help these people who were really quite vulnerable and dependent. And I think that some of the community came in and brought like cheese sandwiches and stuff. Now, I think there's a fund now, is that correct, that you can do? And I think that changed post that.
Yeah, I think that's the one when the manager was siphoning the money off and,
Yeah,
oh, different one, okay.
I think that you're talking about the emergency fund, which I think has kind of expanded. Traditionally, the RHRA does have an emergency fund, and that was typically in instances where, yes, an emergency happened, like there was a tornado, for example, that ripped off the roof of a home. You know, the residents had to be moved out of the home. You know, they needed care in another place. Every home has extra expense insurance they're required to have in case of emergencies, but RHRA does have this special fund. And we have used it in certain circumstances around these, we'll call them abrupt closures. So there have been instances, but I will say you are correct in that, you know, when these instances happen, you know, RHRA has partnered, like it's get out in the community, and has partnered with a whole bunch of, you know, community partners, including Ontario Health and, you know, other community resources. That's something that we do to all come together so that those residents are, you know, assisted in times of need. And then there could be enforcement action that we proceed with at a later time or whatever for the licensee, let's say. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to follow up, at the time of those two retirement home, I won't call them as much closures as abandonments of large retirement homes in Southeast. That was a real eye opener for the RHRA. And I think it was the first time on a large scale that the RHRA really stepped in as a coordinator of community resources, a facilitator to bring together the different agencies. Is that?
Yes. I mean, sometimes, as you know, it's like the legislation doesn't cover, but as organizations, right, everybody comes together. Everyone is coming together, going above and beyond.
Right. I mean, you know, we have rules like, you know, you're supposed to give 90 days notice, but if the operator just walks away and stops paying that, you know, and that happens, you have to, you know, you think that nobody's going to do that, but it does unfortunately happen more often than you would actually think. Luckily, not a huge amount, but more often than you would think.
Yeah. And Jane, the case Jane speaks of, the staff just didn't show up one weekend. So there was no meals provided. No care given. And since then, there have been many other home closures, often under, not always, but often under urgent circumstances. This is an interactive session. Part of our accreditation is to take questions and answers. And I'll bring the microphone around to people who wish to ask questions. And I'd ask you to please identify yourself. I'm going to start here at the back of the room and work forward. I see I have at least two other people who have questions. Could you tell us who you are, please?
Sure. My name is Sanya Banjausik. I'm visiting, but we will become a member, my husband and I, after the meeting. So I have a question about long-term care home, if possible. Can I give you just a little bit of background to understand my question?
We are not able to give legal advice here. And so if the question is case specific to a specific situation you're dealing with, this is something that we better be dealt with an intake call. But if you have a question that's on an issue or a general issue that doesn't involve a particular transaction, that will be fine.
So can I ask a question about visitation rights to long-term care home? Yeah. So my husband and I here, my husband Drago, we hold a power of attorney for an elderly lady who was placed in long-term care home in 2023 in Mississauga. And she's been visited several times, many times by an acquaintance who committed fraud against her. She has no capacity. She has dementia. We have capacity assessment done 3 years ago, and he's been committing fraud by defrauding her by signing checks and having her sign some fake documents. And we asked the long-term care home to prevent him from coming, but they're refusing. They said the only solution for us is to pay for supervised visits by personal support worker, and that they can't restrict his access. We do understand she has rights for visitation, but she's not seeking his visits. She doesn't remember who he is half of the time. And she's clearly defaulted. We showed them the evidence by police and bank that he took $13,000 from her account. So we feel that it's wrong that we have to pay for his supervised visit, that they should cater not to him, but to her safety.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this real life scenario to our attention. I'm as the clinic manager, as the executive director, I'm going to have to instruct our staff not to give a specific answer to the question, because it's really in the nature of legal advice, and it's not something that we can do in this situation. Okay, but what you've told us is very illustrative of the type of problem, and we thank you for raising the issue. Okay. Is there anyone else with a question? I see Joanne.
I'm just wondering, my name is Joanna Taylor, and my question is about people who have been taken from the hospital to a retirement home, kind of in transition, waiting for a long-term care bed. I'm wondering what their legal status is in a retirement home, and who in fact is responsible for their care.
So I'm going to say that I can't answer that question, and I'll explain why. It's not because I don't know the exact answer. It's so when people are being discharged from hospital, there's a couple of different places they might go. So what we do, and like probably the number one call for us as the institutional advocates is definitely around discharge from hospital. And the hospitals will do everything they can to discharge people out of the hospital. So when a person goes to a retirement home, it could be going in as a retirement home resident, where you would sign an admission agreement, you would agree to the cost, all of that, and you'd be a retirement home resident, and then all the stuff that we talked about today applies. However, hospitals rent floors in retirement homes, and those floors may be hospital beds. So some of those units are actually part of the hospital. An example in Toronto would be Scarborough Health Network has beds at Cedar Vale, whatever it's called, or Cedar or something or other like that. Anyways, I think it's called Cedar Vale in Scarborough. And those you can be transferred because those are actually hospital beds, even though they're located in a retirement home. But hospitals also make arrangements with facilities that could also be a floor in a retirement home, which are not part of the retirement home, and they are not hospital beds. They are something that we really don't know about. They often will have a management company, like Bayshore is usually the company that manages it. And the legality of those units, in my mind, is pretty tenuous. I think they're probably illegal long-term care homes. And who has authority over it? Really, frankly, nobody. And there's no rules. So I can't answer the specific question because it depends on where you are, what the facility is, and all that. But there's these three different kinds of things that are out there. And so a lot of them have no oversight, and those are the ones they often get pushed into.
It's a problem, isn't it? It's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
With no oversight on a whole lot of vulnerable people.
That's correct. And people are just told you have to go to this retirement home, blah, 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 and you have to go there. And so it is an issue as to what is it? Are these people told what they are? And there's never mandatory to go to them. Like you don't have to go from, if you are in hospital and you qualify for long-term care and you have a right to apply for long-term care from hospital, you do not have to go to a retirement home or one of these other units. If it's a hospital bed, though, they can move you, but you're still a hospital patient and the same rules apply.
And Joanna, if I may, This also nudges up to another problem that we've heard of is long-term care creep into retirement homes, where we've often heard from long-term care home retirement home residents and their families about moving into a community-based dwelling, which is a retirement home, and finding it populated with hospital patients en route to long-term care who are quite a different population. And sometimes to the discomfort of the community dwelling retirement home residents. We have a question here. I know who you are. You're Lise Bourgeois.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lise Bourgeois. I'm the MPP for Thunder Bay Superior North, and I'm also the official opposition critic for seniors and accessibility. Hi.
Nice to put a face to the name on my desk that's sitting there.
Right, likewise. So yeah, first I want to thank you, this organization, for the really, really important work that you do. You're talking about us, right? We're all becoming older adults. I'm definitely crossed that threshold. And as you go further into that, you become more and more vulnerable, really, to many, many things that we've heard about this evening. So I first want to thank you for that work. I want to, if I may, just talk about it. I've got three things here, if I can. I don't know if people have heard about Bill 60, which talked about removing security of tenure from anybody renting anywhere, anytime. Now they've withdrawn that, but what they've said is it's not the right time now to do this, which means that they've shown their hand, and that very much on the side of corporate landlords who could kick anybody out at any time. So it would clearly increase homelessness dramatically, but we don't want that to happen ever. So just a heads up that it's only withdrawn for the moment. And it kind of on a similar line, we know that long-term care was privatized during the Mike Harris government, and that Mike Harris then went on to become chairman of Chartwell and took home, I don't know, $7 million plus in the deal. It wasn't always like that. So that's also something to remember when we're talking about long-term care almost always being for profit now. That in the Heritage Glen case, and you probably know this already, but they are real estate investment trusts. They don't exist to provide service. They exist to ultimately to turn over their properties and get a greater profit. And that's what happened to the folks at Heritage Glen. And it was horrible, horrible. You talked about in a seniors residence, you've got the rent portion, and then you've got the food and services portion. And if I understood you correctly, it's all defined as rent under the Act, or did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, so rent is defined as the amount you pay for the accommodation plus other services, etc. And actually, we were spending some time looking into that earlier today because we thought to ourselves, well, can you get evicted if you don't pay for care services? And the answer is yes, of course. If you're not paying part of what you're supposed to be paying to reside in the home, you can be evicted for cause. But there are different restrictions on rent versus care services in terms of fees.
So yeah, it sort of depends. So this is where we were having a big discussion this afternoon. So I'm glad we looked at it.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the care home sections, it says you have to set out what you're paying for rent, and that can be covered by rental control. And then you have your care services. But when it comes to eviction, rent and services are under the definition of rent. So it's a bit confusing, and that's why we were having a big discussion this afternoon, because we don't do a lot of eviction work in our office. So the issue came up and we were just trying to sort it out. So, but it's very confusing because the care home section says one thing, but the actual legislation at the beginning, the definitions say that rent includes care services.
Okay, so and I think you're referencing this already. The rent portion may be under rent control, but the other expenses can increase any amount that they want, which we've seen. We've got a private members bill that will be coming up at some point that tries to restrict those increases to inflation. Government will not say yes, but we try to get the ideas out so to build public pressure to hopefully at some point fix that. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the Trespass to Property Act. And I know, Jane, you were interviewed relatively recently for that CBC case. And we've just gone through this with the Ontario Patient Ombudsman that had planned on and had put out a paper already and had planned on presenting to facility managers that the Trespass to Property Act could somehow be used fairly. We argued at length back and forth over a couple of months with their office, and then they decided that, okay, yeah, you can't use it in the seniors' residence, but people in long-term care don't have the same rights. And so it is possible to use it there. So we just fought and fought and fought. And then we were about to bring in the police service called LEAPPS. And they are trained. And I don't have a problem in my community because I have a LEAPS police officer who lives there and will not allow any facility to use the TPA. But ultimately, the patient ombudsman withdrew the piece, is not presenting. So we won that battle. We haven't won the war. Thank you.
Please, thank you for all those comments. They're quite relevant to all the work that we do. We're a member of LEAPS. We work with them on that issue, and we've made submissions to the legislature on the Rental Fairness Act some years ago to the effect that retirement home tenants need rent regulation. There is no regulation of the meals and care costs for meals and care services in retirement homes.
Our newsletter has
We have our newsletter out by the elevators and available online, and we have an article in our newsletter to that effect as well. But the thing that makes my hair stand up is the suggestion, what hair I have, well, the suggestion of an end to security of tenure. Security of tenure is a legal term that's not really widely understood. It means that residential tenants in Ontario have the legal right to continue to occupy their premises unless they're evicted with cause. Tenants in Ontario did not always have this right, and I can speak from personal family history. My grandfather was a lawyer called about 100 years ago, and at a time when there was not security of tenure. And following World War II, there was then, as there is now, a housing crisis in Southern Ontario and Toronto. And my grandparents were evicted from their rental apartment on Bayview Avenue without cause because of the housing crisis, which during the housing crisis caused really extensive injury to my grandparental family because there was no security of tenure. It was a landmark in 1967 when the Robarts government enacted law which created security of tenure for Ontario residential tenants, and that has been the bedrock of residential tenancy law throughout Ontario since 1967. For the suggestion that security of tenure should come to an end in the way that commercial leases are dealt with. We often see that businesses have a lease for 5, 10, 20 years, depending on the business. And when the lease ends, the commercial landlord decides not to renew the lease unless it's on exorbitant terms. The business owner can't afford it and they close the business. And if the suggestion were that the same should apply to residential tenants, that at the end of the lease, the residential tenant should be subject to eviction, barring a renegotiation of a new lease, that would end residential tenant or security of tenure in Ontario, and would be absolutely devastating to tenants in general, and in particular to older adult tenants who do not have the ability to cope with rapidly rising rents. They don't have the resources to do that. Are there any other questions? I note that we're right pretty much on time at 8:17 or 8:18, thanks to the wonderful presentation by Jane and Bethany. If there are no other questions, then I'm going to ask a few things. I will momentarily close the meeting and note that it's the first time that we've had our annual general meeting, on my knowledge, competing with the fourth game of the World Series involving the Toronto Blue Jays. And although you might miss the first 9 innings, you'll probably get home in time for the innings 10 through 18. Thank you for your attendance tonight. I heard someone call the Toronto Blue Jays the Toronto Glue Jays, because they're like a gluey team. They stick together as a team and they look after one another. And that often reminds me of working here at ACE. I think of us as the Glue Jays, where our staff and our board, and I find often that our members, really help each other out, and we're concerned about each other. And thank you as a team for all of that. I will ask any available ACE staff to help under Kimberly's direction and Heather's direction to sort of help us get things back to where we are tomorrow, or where we need to be for tomorrow. Following the meeting, you'll notice that there's a piece of metal across the ceiling here. We're going to have to close some doors to make this room here available for a short board meeting, and the room on the other side where Ms. Vaugeois and Philippa and Lisa are all sitting, a place for socialization and to gather up and to have some of the rest of the food. And with that, I close the meeting and thank everyone for your attendance, both in person and online tonight. Thank you.
And it's still 0-0 in the first.
Sorry, what's the score?
0-0 in the first. It just started.
Okay.